Hello everyone, welcome to part 4 of perception. So, at the end of our last screencast, we came to this idea of implicit personality theories, and we take our personality and we start to put things together about how different personality types cluster together. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we cluster these traits together and how we don't always do a great job of putting them together. We can get a decent idea of a person, but this can lead us down some paths that we don't exactly like. So these implicit personality theories, again, this is different than implicit personal theories of communication. Those are a different thing. This deals with our perception and it's linked to personality. And so these implicit personality theories will lead us to form impressions of others. And just simply are mental pictures of who people are and how we feel about them. So we've talked about how these things happen with the perception process, but we're about to figure out why impressions are so powerful, why that first impression is so powerful. So what happens is we will take this information and we will form a gestalt. All right? You may have heard the word before. Maybe you know exactly what we're talking about here, but we're going to talk about how we form gestalts. And what happens is we will take an initial encounter and because of the way our brains work and because of sometimes the necessity to be able to form an impression quickly, we form a gestalt. A gestalt is our general impressions of people, either positive or negative. And what happens is we take little pieces of information and we sort of blow those up into the entire thing, okay? So it's an impression of a person as a whole rather than as the sum of individual parts. So I always like to see kind of what's out there on stuff like this. I did a quick search on Gestalt just in Google, and of course the first thing that pops up is Wikipedia. And on Wikipedia they mention that oftentimes Gestalt gets translated as, the sum is greater than the parts. But that's not right, okay? And I actually think the Wikipedia says that. Right? That is incorrect. It means that the whole is different than the sum, okay? The Gestalt, and Gestalt psychology is where this is coming from, okay? Gestalt, it says it really well here. You get an impression of a person as a whole rather than as the sum of individual parts. Okay, so it's not the sum of the parts. It's an impression of, it's a whole impression, but it's not based on all the pieces. And so like I said when I first started this a second ago, it's like having 2 or 3 pieces of information, and then we just sort of pump those up with air, and they sort of inflate. I couldn't think of the word, could you tell? Inflate. They inflate, and we inflate these 2 or 3 pieces of information into a whole. That's a gestalt. It's not the sum of the parts, okay? You want the sum of the parts. The sum of the parts is actually where we're going to here in a slide or two. But that's a gestalt, okay? You form it, and they form rapidly just like this. They require little mental effort or communicative effort. You and I can have a very short interaction where we both sort of look at each other and grunt, hey, hey, and that's enough to form a gestalt from, okay? That's enough to form a gestalt from, where we can have a very limited interaction and have that happen. In fact, you and I can form gestalts off of people who we've never even met or interacted with in person. And so this happens all the time with us regular people and famous people, where we will have a favorite musician or an actor or actress or I don't know, whatever you're into, a sports figure, something like that, and we don't know much about them, but we will take a little piece of information and we'll blow it up into the whole. We have a positivity bias, and so the tendency is for the gestalt to be positive right when it's first formed. We're working with such little information when we form that initial gestalt, that we tend to just have that information be either neutral or positive. Very rarely is someone doing something so negative that that is what we do. Now, do we form negative gestalts? Yes, we do. You know, does that person who we mentioned earlier in an earlier screencast who cuts us off, we're probably pretty quick about creating a negative gestalt there, okay? It doesn't mean we don't, but the tendency is when we genuinely come into interaction with someone, we're looking for those positive things. And so we'll go, oh, they seem like a nice person, and they like coffee. Okay, Now, there is the positivity bias, but the negativity effect, okay? And again, I am, myself and the book, is nutshelling, an entire way of thinking here when it comes to understanding human behavior. But the negativity effect is the tendency to emphasize negative information as we learn more about someone. So as you and I come together initially, yes, we get to know each other, and we each form a gestalt. And then over the course of time, we tend to prioritize and emphasize negative information. This is one of the reasons why, and just one, okay? This is one of the reasons why the more you get to know someone, the more you're going to notice the negative stuff. We actually we put value on that. And the research behind that is fascinating. Your book says it well. Across cultures, people perceive negative information as more informative about someone's true character than positive information. In fact, John Gottman, who studies long-term relationships, has studied conflict, and he actually talks about what perspective are you in your relationships. Are you in the positive perspective or the negative perspective? And over the course of time, it's very easy to get into the negative perspective because of this. We emphasize the negative information as, well, that's who this person really is. And maybe it's true. Maybe it really is who they are. I'm not saying we're not always saying it's wrong to take part in the negativity effect, but over the course of time, we tend to emphasize that as being more true. Okay? So gestalts are important, and as we construct them, there's what's called the halo effect and the horn effect. Okay? The halo effect means we will positively interpret what someone says or does if we have a positive gestalt that we've built up. Okay? So if you and I are romantically interested in each other and we're out on our first date and you're chewing with your mouth open, but I just find you so physically attractive that I'm just like, oh, it's kind of cute how they chew their food. That behavior, objective behavior, chewing with your mouth open, could be seen as a positive, okay? If it's the halo effect. If I have a negative gestalt on you, you and I met in your first thing, and you and I got off on the wrong foot, and we both have a negative gestalt of each other, you chewing with your mouth open, I just would be disgusted by it, okay? Now, does that mean over the course of time the halos don't wear off? Yes, they wear off, okay? They do. But you have the halo effect and the horn effect. And so what happens is depending on the gestalt that we form then, that impacts how we perceive behavior. The initial gestalt, based on such little pieces of information. But it's enough for us then to begin to start to perceive future behaviors. Now, chances are there are all of us in this class who you meet someone, you get off on the wrong foot, and you hate each other, and then you end up being best friends, that whole situation. That is proof that you can overcome a gestalt, but the overcoming of the gestalt will be a part of the relationship. Chances are, if there is someone who, I even have students who are like, yeah, I have a great story about that, where this person and I met, and we hated each other, and now we're married, or now we live together and we've got kids, or whatever. It's like, yeah, people overcome these. They really do. And so I've seen it happen over and over again, but it impacts that perception, and there has to be a shift down the line. That's how powerful these are. So that's Gestalt, okay? Again, we're talking about impressions. Remember, we're talking about initial impressions. And the Gestalt is not the sum of the parts. It's not saying the sum of the parts is greater. It's something different. The Gestalt is that little piece blown up into the whole, okay? What we do want, though, is the algebraic impression. When I first heard this, it scared me because algebra was not fun for me. I could do it, and I did it, but it was never fun for me. But what the algebraic impression is about is adding and subtracting and moving things around as you learn more information. The more you learn, the more things seem to make sense, and you move things around. Sometimes you add, sometimes you subtract. Maybe that thing that was cool at the beginning is not cool anymore, but you understand it more, and so it's okay. Does that make sense? So just because something is a negative doesn't mean that it has to completely go away. Just understand it more. So the algebraic impression is the most accurate and refined. It says, look, over time we are going to work this equation out. Over time, this impression is going to get more clear as I move forward. All right. And what happens is we begin to weight some information more heavily than other information because of its importance, okay? And depending on its importance and depending on its positivity or negativity. And so something that seemed really important in the beginning, maybe you realize isn't important. And the algebraic impression leaves room for that to go, okay, you know, it was really important, but now it's not that important. So it was really important and it was negative, but now it's not that important and I don't care that it's negative. Make sense? The algebraic impression is really what you want because the Gestalt just limits you to one or something very simplistic, whereas the algebraic is much more refined. I think refined and accurate is a good way of describing it. So, okay, we've got these impressions. How do we deal with our perception of others? Okay, because that's the whole chapter is we did. Considering self last chapter, now we're perceiving others. So, how do we improve our perception? Well, here we go. The first thing you do is you offer empathy. You embrace world-mindedness, which is a cool way of saying open-mindedness. And then you engage in perspective checking. And I want to just hit these very quickly. Okay? So, empathy is different than sympathy. Okay? Sympathy is like walking beside someone. Like I can feel with you, all right? So I can have sympathy for someone. Empathy is feeling inside, basically. Like I can feel what you're feeling. I know how you feel. It's hard to empathize if you've never been through the same thing. You can sympathize and you can imagine and maybe get into empathy, but empathy is really powerful because it's that extra step past sympathy. I can sympathize all day long with this particular situation, but empathizing with it, it can be hard to empathize with it if I've never been through it. I've never felt it. Okay? And so one of the things that I've learned is like for my spouse, I very rarely, if ever, felt fear walking out of where I work at night. It's not in a bad place or anything like that, but I am a big guy, and that's not something I think about. Whereas my spouse feels that. It's hard for me to empathize with that. I can sympathize, and I can support it, and I can understand it, and I can listen, and I can do what I can to help ease that. But empathy, until I feel the fear, until I felt that same thing, it's hard for me to fully empathize. I can kind of get there, but not quite. And so we feel into others' thoughts and emotions. We feel into it. Not just feel with, we feel into it. Okay? There are two components, perspective taking and empathic concern. So I can perspective take and get there, just not as well as if I've been there. Make sense? So we perspective take and we have empathic concern. I'm going to sneeze again. The sneeze happened that time. Woohoo! Okay, I feel better. Okay, so you have perspective taking and empathic concern. So this is the part, I can do perspective taking. This is the part that if I have not lived through it, is harder to do. You can still get there, but it's not as effective as if I've been there. So checking your perception. How do you actually do perspective taking? Check your punctuation. Ask yourself about the order. Be willing to listen to the other person. Check your knowledge. Is there something you're missing? Check your attributions. Are you attributing meaning correctly? Check your influences. Are you hungry? Are you tired? Is something going on at work that's making you grumpy at home? And then check your impressions. Is there a gestalt going on and you're getting some information that goes against that? All of this comes together to help us understand perception. And that's it, folks. I'll see you in the discussion board.